Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this local review body for the 20th of September 2022. This is the first committee meeting to be held following the funeral of Her late Majesty yesterday, and now signifies a return to business as normal. Before I proceed, I would like to introduce the top table. So here we go. On my left is Bailey Mike Williamson, and to my right is Councillor Dave Cuthbert. I am Councillor Bob Braun, the convener of the committee, and all three of us sit on the planning committee as a rule. To my far right is Mr. Ross Burton. Mr. Burton is a planning advisor to the LRB, who is not part of the planning department of PKC, has had no previous involvement with any of the applications we look at today. He is here as an independent advisor for this body. To my far left is Mr. Fogg, who is our legal advisor for this morning, and to his left is Jessica Guild, who is our committee services officer. So the next part of the agenda is to ask if there are any declarations of interest. So my two colleagues, are there any declarations of interest this morning?
No, convener.
None from me.
Thank you both. The next point on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the last local review body. Can we agree those, please? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. And so with that, we'll move to the first case on the agenda this morning, number 4.1. This is to do with the erection of a dwelling house and garage ancillary building on land 30 metres southwest of 32 Lintrose Holding, Camp Muir. I'll ask Mr. Burton to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. It's for the removal of some redundant farm buildings, as you said, and the erection of a dwelling house. The first picture shows the application site within the countryside. It's a fairly remote site, so it starts off with a. You can see the red site circled to the right-hand side of the picture. It's a bit blurred there, but you can see there's a group of houses either side of it and across the road from it. Next slide, please. That's the application site, bounded in red. You can see it's got some fairly substantial, a mixture of substantial farm buildings on it. The applicant's house is immediately to the north of that. It's a small bungalow. The applicants also own the land to the rear of the application site. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. That's the road looking back towards the main road, the road in front of the site. You can see it's very much a rural location. Next slide, please. And that's the access to the applicant's house and to the application site on the left-hand side of the picture. You can see there's a house directly across the road from the application site. Next slide, please. That's looking into the site from the main road. It's looking directly at some of the buildings, or the buildings which are proposed to be removed, and you can see the field beyond it, which is the applicant's land, and you can see the house, the car parked on the left-hand side is parked beside the applicant's house, which is to remain. Next slide, please. And this is looking back, looking into the site from slightly further along the road. You get a better view of the applicant's house, which the applicants have renovated the bungalow that you can see that's white on the left-hand side, and you can also see that there's an access into the field beyond, past the buildings that are to be removed. Next slide, please. And looking back at the applicant's house and the buildings on the left, this is from the edge of the site, adjacent to the field. You can see the houses beyond. There's a garage just beyond the hedge, which belongs to a house on the other side of the road, and the house beyond that is not in the same group of houses, but just beyond it. It's slightly it's slightly higher than the buildings that are on the main road beside on the road leading to the application site, which are all bungalows. Next slide, please. This is looking at this, and the next few slides are looking at the buildings which are to be removed. You can see there's quite a variety of buildings at different ages and different methods of construction, different materials. Next slide, please. And that's looking along the edge of the site. The field on the left-hand side there is not part of the application site. The boundary is the access road you can see in front of you. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the other edge of the application site. You can see there's a single-storey house just beyond the site, and you can see there are dwellings on the other side of the road. Next slide, please. And that's looking back towards the woods which are beside the applicant's house. Next slide, please. And looking down through the site towards the field at the back, you can see it's a very open countryside at the rear. The post and wire fence is the boundary of the site. Next slide, please. And that's looking back towards the applicant's house and towards the access to the site. You can see from all these photographs that the buildings are in differing states of repair, and there are none that are of any note. Thanks, Audrey. Could you go back to that? Yeah, thank you. That's the best one. Okay. So I'll start by summarising the applicant's case, and then I'll summarise the report of handling, and then identify the relevant material considerations. The applicant's case is that the application site forms part of a small holding that they acquired in 2021. The cottage has been sympathetically restored. The farm buildings are in a state of disrepair. It's acknowledged that the application site has a wider frontage to the road than the neighbouring plots, and that the proposed house at 1 3/4 stories is larger than the adjoining houses, but the plot size is fixed by the adjacent plots, which I think you can see on the photograph that's on display there. And the other houses in the cluster that the plot is situated in are of a similar size of plot anyway. The handling report states that the proposed house does not complement its surroundings and is at odds with the surrounding houses. It suggested that if a site visit had taken place, an assessment would be made which takes account of recent developments instead of relying on Google Street View, which is out of date. Such an assessment would have noted the houses in the settlement which are of similar size to that proposed. Now, what's being referred to there is the house which you could see from one of the photographs beyond the houses on the other side of the road. You can just see the corner of the plot at the top of that photograph. That's the house which is taller than the existing houses. It's perhaps of about 1.5 story height. It's contended that the design and scale of the proposed house is in character with numerous other holdings in the area where new homes have been built along post-war holdings. The report of handling states that Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, applies. Category 5 of the guidance covers the conversion or replacement of non-domestic rural buildings, but is not considered to be relevant here. The most appropriate category is the second, infill sites. This allows the development of up to 2 houses in a gap between existing buildings, as long as the plot is comparable in size to the neighbouring plots and has a similar road frontage. The proportion of the plot is no greater than the existing plots. There are no uses in the vicinity which should prevent the new house having an adequate standard of amenity. The size and design of the new house should be sympathetic to neighbouring buildings, and the plot should not include a field access. The handling report also considers the proposal under Category 1 building groups. It's considered that the proposal doesn't comply with Category 2 infill, as the plot created is not comparable in size to existing plots and doesn't have a similar size of road frontage, and the design of the house is not sympathetic to the neighbouring buildings. It's also considered that the proposal is contrary to Policy 1A and 1B (C) of the Local Development Plan, as the development would not complement its surroundings in terms of appearance, height and massing, materials, finish and colour. No public representations were received. Material considerations. The case officer's identification of policy 19 category 2 was correct, and this forms the most relevant material consideration under the local development plan. Category 1 building groups is also material, but does not outweigh the consideration under category 2. Some observations. The proposal would form a new housing plot, which would be slightly wider than the two plots on the opposite side of the road. The new house would be slightly higher at 1 3/4 storey than the adjacent houses, what would be a similar height to more recently constructed houses in the group. And as the applicant states, constructed too recently to be shown on Google Street View, which are slightly larger than the immediately surrounding houses. But it should be noticed, all have their accommodation on the ground floor. The committee needs to decide whether the proposal with the second floor of accommodation is in accordance with policy 19 category 2 infill sites. Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll open up for questions. I'll start off. I just have one. I'm looking at the picture in front of us, the frontage of the proposed site, and I'm comparing it or trying to compare it with the frontage of the house opposite, which is one up from the bottom. So I'm looking at the picture. That looks, I know the depth is different, obviously, but the frontage looks to me to be very similar. Would that be right? I mean, obviously, I didn't have a laser sight when I was there to measure it, but it looks very similar there if you move them, slide it up a bit. And the one above it looks very similar as well.
I would tend to agree with you, Councillor. I think that I think there's a slight difference, but it's a question of degree rather than a significant difference.
Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
No, convener, I don't think so.
And Bailey Williamson, any questions?
Do apologise, no questions from me, convener.
Okay, then at this stage, I will ask now members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any more information? For myself, I'm fine. Councillor Cuthbert.
I'm content to proceed.
And Bailey Williamson.
I'm content to proceed too.
All right. Okay, members, then we now move to debate, and I will start on this one if I may. I visited the site myself, and as I queried, the frontage to me is similar to other properties in the area. It is a greater depth of plot, admittedly, but with a sympathetic design there, I don't think that would be a concern. Plans mentioned that the infill site, it should be considered an infill site, and that is I think is the appropriate approach to this. My only concern is not the size of the plot; it's just the design. If you're there, the properties around it are all single story of type in that particular group of housing. I feel I would be concerned about a 1 3/4 high house. So in this instance, my thoughts are to refuse the appeal, but to change the, if we get to that point, to change the reasons for refusal to reflect the fact that it's not the plot itself, it is just, in this instance, the design, and I just don't feel it would fit in with the other properties around it. So I'll pass on now to Councillor Cuthbert. Are you happy to proceed with the information you have before you?
I'm happy to proceed. I disagree slightly. I agree that the the size of the plot is marginal, the difference in size. I feel that there are other houses in that area that aren't shown on this that are higher than the ones that are shown. They're also higher up because the ground rises on that side of the road. So this is actually slightly lower than the road. I think there's nothing wrong with the layout. It matches what's already pre-existing, if you like. It's taking the same sort of footprint. So I'm actually minded to accept this and give consent to this application.
Thank you, Councillor. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I have the same thoughts as you about the size of the plots. I think it does look about the same size. The overall size of the property, I'm minded to approve this, given that Ortage House, I think it's called, which is a bit further up, is just on the same sort of scale. So I'm minded to approve the application.
Thank you very much. So obviously a slight disagreement there, but it's a majority decision. So Mr. Fogg, we've decided to approve the appeal.
Thank you. Perhaps Councillors Cuthbert and Williamson could provide clarification here, but I got the impression that okay, no, sorry. I sense that you, Councillors Cuthbert and Williamson, both regarded this as something they could support as according with policy and not as a departure from it. And that, for the purpose of the minute, am I right?
That's correct, Mr. Fogg.
That is correct, yeah. In terms of conditions and informatives, do you do those now, or?
Yeah, gotcha. Sure.
This could be a long morning. I think Ross Burton and I will be happy to apply the normal conditions of the type that one would expect, but if there's anything in particular that you would wish us to be imposing that might not otherwise be evident to us, this would be the ideal opportunity for you to be telling us.
I was just going to say there's a number of representations with conditions written into them, so if we can just ensure that they're incorporated in any conditions or informatives.
I was going to also ask about access to the farmer's field and making a suitable access to the farmer's field as well.
Yes, and we can check obviously the access in terms of this application, which is a full one, but
No, and I was just checking to see that there are no developer contributions required in the handling report, so we're okay that way.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's that application, the appeal is approved. I knew you were on that one, so that's that. Okay, you're more than welcome to stay for the rest and watch technology fail before us. But okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye. So, members, we'll now move on to number 4.2, which is the erection of a dwelling house on land 50 metres west of land 50 metres west of Keltney House, Keltney Burton. Again, I'll ask Mr. Burton to introduce the case.
Thank you, Chair. As usual, we'll start with the slideshow. So if we could go to the first slide, thank you. You can see the application site bounded in red. There, the applicant's house is. You can see there are two houses along the road, along the roadside, just to the south of the application site. The applicant's house is the one on the east, and the house to the west is owned by a different party. The applicant's on the field, which the application site is shown in. The access that you can see in the picture there was formed when a hydroelectric scheme was put into the field. So the proposal is to use the same access and to build the house pretty much where the access road stops within the red line. We can see the next slide, please. Right, this is within the application site itself, looking towards the pardon me, looking towards the hills at the rear. It's looking across the site with the applicant's house behind the camera. Next slide, please. And further into the site, that's looking towards the actual where the house would be built, which is at the further end of that photograph. Next slide, please. And that's looking towards the access. You can see a hedge in front of the front of the application site there. On the other side of the hedge is the road. In fact, there are two hedges there. There's one separating the road from the site of the from the plot of the neighbouring house, and there's another smaller hedge, less formed by the post and wire fence that you can see in front of you, which forms the boundary of the site. Next slide, please. And this is showing the access to this to the site from the road. The existing access, as I've said, would be retained and would be used for the house. Next slide, please. And this is looking directly at the site of the house, which would be in front of just in front of where this photograph is. You can see it's looking back towards the applicant's house. You can see the applicant's house, which is you can just make it out near the trees on the right hand side of the application site. And I think that's all the slides. So we can go back to the one more. Sorry, that's looking. You can see more clearly the applicant's house there, which is just beyond the post and wire fence. And yeah, and that's back to the original site. So I'll summarise as ever the applicant's case and then the report of handling. The applicant's current house, Keltney House, is no longer suited to the applicant's needs for health reasons. The applicants now need a single-storey house close to their existing house. It was confirmed in pre-application advice from the council that when considering the housing for local people under policy 19, housing in the countryside, category 3.4, houses for local people, was the best, was relevant. This category supports the development of housing for local people who've lived in the area for at least 3 years and are inadequately housed. Inadequately housed includes residents whose housing needs have changed to the extent that their current house no longer offers suitable accommodation. The guidance states that each case will be decided on its merits. This application was submitted because one of the family members has new and continually changing medical needs, which necessitates two things: a house without stairs and a new dwelling close to their existing house. The council, according to the applicant's agent, accepts the applicant's need for a new house and have accepted the evidence submitted confirming there's no other suitable accommodation nearby. The issue which the applicants and council disagree on is that of setting. Proposals under category 3.4 must meet a siting criteria. They must blend sympathetically with the landform, use existing trees, buildings, slopes or other natural features for a backdrop, use an identifiable site with long established boundaries which separate the site naturally from the surrounding ground, and make a positive contribution to the surrounding landscape. The site is argued to meet 3 of the 4 requirements. It is agreed that it does not use an identifiable site. The hill behind the proposed house would form a natural backdrop. The applicant proposes to plant trees which will help the house make a positive contribution to the landscape, and the house itself is designed to be in keeping with other rural houses in the area. It's argued that non-compliance with the single policy criterion of category 3.4 should not mean that a proposal is automatically refused, and that instead an assessment should be made on the overall conformity with the development plan. A Court of Session judgment is quoted, which concludes that the decision maker is required to assess all the criteria and then decide, in the light of the whole plan, whether the proposal accords with it. The second reason for refusal on placemaking grounds is essentially the same argument as above. The applicant's appeal statement contains other examples of consented developments which had a partial compliance to the relevant policy. The report of handling identifies policy 19 housing into countryside as the relevant policy. Section 3.4 houses for local people is relevant. It's accepted that the applicants have lived in the area for many years and their current accommodation is now unsuitable. They've also demonstrated to the council's satisfaction that there's no other suitable accommodation available within the area. The proposal falls to be assessed, therefore, against the criteria of siting. It's acknowledged that the slope to the rear of the proposed house would form a simple, suitable backdrop, but the site is relatively featureless, and the extent to which it will blend in with the existing landform will depend on the extent and quality of the proposed landscaping. This will take time to become established, and the site as it stands is very open. The site does not comply with the requirements of the policy in that it is not identifiable, does not have long established boundaries, and in that respect does not comply with the requirements of policy 19 as set out in the criteria for category 3.4. No public representations were received for the application. Material considerations. The case officer has correctly identified the material considerations under the local development plan. There are no other material considerations such as privacy, overlooking or impact on neighbouring properties. Some observations. The degree of compliance with the specific detailed requirements of a policy is a judgment which must be made in the round. That is, whether the decision maker is in cognizance of all the facts of the case. It's clear the proposal does not meet all the criteria set out in category 3.4. It meets two and will only meet another fully when the landscaping proposed as part of the application is at least partly grown. The decision, therefore, is whether this is or is not sufficient for the purposes of the local development plan policy when all factors of the case are taken into consideration. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I will open up to questions. So, Bailey Williamson, have you any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you. It was about the acceptable form of landscaping. Are we saying that the once the landscaping matures, this application may well be supported upon maturity of the landscaping?
The case officer makes reference to the landscaping proposed taking time to mature and taking time to make it comply. So the inference there is that in time it will comply, but at the outset it will not.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Could we go back to the previous slide, please? Yeah, I'm just trying to work out the border on the right-hand side there. I think that's looking towards the current house.
Yeah, that's looking towards the applicant's current house. That's correct. So that border of the postal wire fence is the rear of the plot of the adjacent house.
Okay, and that develops into a hedge further along, does it?
That's right. Well, it's not much of a hedge. It's not very well developed. It's a much bigger hedge, much more noticeable hedge between that garden plot and the road.
So the road itself sits quite a bit below the plot, is that right?
That's correct. This field is higher than the road. You can see the ground slopes away, and that's the roof of the applicant's hedge. You can see, and that's closer to the level of the road.
Thank you. And in terms of defining the site, I have visited the site. It did seem as if the hill sort of formed the back part of the site, which is flatter, it seems, where the house is being proposed, and then it rises up fairly steeply at the edge of the proposed site. Is that right?
That's correct. If we can go back to the very first slide, I think that shows that. Yeah, you can see the application site is in the foreground, and there is a slight slope, but then it starts to slope much more steeply, as you say, to a hill with some trees scattered along it, and some buildings on the. You can see some buildings on the left-hand side there.
Thank you for that.
And I have no questions on this one myself. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson.
No more information required, sir.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So we'll now move on to debate. And can I ask Councillor Cuthbert, having to consider the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, can I ask you to start, please?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I am minded to approve this application. As I said, I have visited the site and had a look at it. I actually had a lot of trouble finding the site because it's very well hidden by the hedge and the fact the road sits well below the site. I think it's bounded on two sides by pre-existing boundaries that are hedges and are in development. And I think the back part is actually bounded by the hillside, and then the road on the other side of it bounds the site as well. I think, given the needs of the family, that this should be approved, and that's my position.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. I'm also minded to approve, subject to conditions around about planning, landscaping, and the introduction of mature and semi-mature trees, which are subject to officer approval.
Thank you. And I think on this occasion, I'm going to concur with you as well. I'm of a mind to approve this case. We've heard already that the applicants have lived in the area for some time, and there are medical needs for this in this instance, and there is no other suitable accommodation in the area that they can find. So with that in mind, and looking at the picture as a whole, whilst I appreciate it doesn't quite fit supplementary guidance, I think because of the circumstances, and not wanting to set a precedent, it's merely because of the circumstances. I'm in mind to approve as well. There is a picture in the application papers which show the property as it is, or as it would be without landscaping, as it will be with landscaping. And I agree with Bailey Williamson that we should have a condition for either semi-mature landscaping or trees, as opposed to fresh trees going in. But apart from that, which will then help obviously hide the property, that would be my concern, and normal conditions after that. But it is concurred that we agree with the application for the appeal. So over to you, Mr. Fogg.
Thank you, Convener. I'm clear on the basis for the decision reached this morning with what's been stated already.
And you're happy with all the conditions that we would need? Yeah. Okay, fine. Bailey Williamson, yes, you want to come in?
I do apologise. Yes, it was just if we are going to be planting mature trees, could we also include a condition that they have to survive at least 5 years?
Mr. Fogg, is it all right with yourself?
Yes.
Fine, thank you very much. So on that particular paper, that's 4-2, we have had a unanimous agreement to approve the appeal. So with that, members, we'll now move on to item 4.3, which is change of use from ancillary accommodation unit to dwelling house at 19 Main Street, Almond Bank. Once again, Mr. Burton, if you could introduce the papers.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. Not many pictures this time. As you say, it's a change of use of a single-storey dwelling which has consent as ancillary accommodation to the adjacent house. You can see the application site on the screen there. The adjacent house is a house and post office immediately to the south, just where the number 19 is shown on the drawings. So the red line extends to the rear of the house to incorporate a decking area, which I think you can make out in the aerial photograph there. The decking area is close to the house, and the garden area beyond the red line pertains to the house at number 19, so the applicant's house. Next slide, please. This is looking along Main Street. The application property is the single-storey house beyond the single-storey white cottage and just before the two-storey house, which is the applicant's main house. Next slide, please. You can see in that slide that the application property, which is the lighter coloured rendered house, single storey, has a parking area in front of it, and it is linked to but separate from the house, the two-storey house adjacent to it. Next slide, please. That's a clearer view showing the house and the parking area in front of it. The main house, which is to the right on the on the picture there, has a driveway on the other side of the house for vehicle access. I think that's all the pictures. So back to the, oh no, one more. You can see the house is small and is a similar scale to the adjacent house to the left there. I think that's all the slides this time. Yeah, thank you. So the application is, as you said, Chair, for the change of use from of the application property from ancillary accommodation to the dwelling house. The application was originally granted for the construction of this house as ancillary accommodation to the main house by the applicants were the owners of the main house, and the ancillary accommodation was for the accommodation of family members. I believe it was the applicant's mother. There are now no family members who could use this the accommodation as ancillary accommodation. Hence this application. To summarise the applicant's case, it's a brief outline of the planning history of the site. In 2005, an application for erection of a dwelling house on the site was refused because it was considered not to provide satisfactory residential environment and would increase on-street parking. A resubmission was then approved, subject to a condition that it would only be occupied by family members of the host dwelling. In 2021, a change of use to a dwelling house without the condition restricting it to family members was refused for the same reason as the original refusal, and then in 2022 this application was made. The reason for the application is that while family members have occupied the property for the last 15 years, there are no longer any relatives who could occupy it. Meanwhile, maintenance of the property falls on the applicant. The applicant mentions that there's been no engagement with the case officer and no site visit was made. The scale and appearance of the property allows it to blend in with its surroundings, and the rear garden area comprises a decking area similar to the plot sizes of numbers 3 and 5 Main Street. The report of handling makes the point that the use of the property as a separate dwelling would contravene Policy 17 residential areas of the local development plan, which seeks to ensure that development is compatible with the amenity and character of the area. The property has insufficient garden ground for a detached dwelling. The rear garden ground is approximately 48 square metres, and the views from within the property and the raised decking at the rear directly overlook the private rear garden space of the adjacent property. As the ground slopes away downwards from the property, pardon me, screening would not resolve this. The application has not included information on off-street parking for the main house, number 17. The parking area in front of the application property would not be sufficient to serve both properties. Representations, there were no public representations received. Material considerations, Policy 17 of the Local Development Plan is a material consideration, as is the impact the proposal would have on neighbours' privacy. The concerns raised over off-street parking in the handling report is not material, as the main house has a separate driveway. Some observations, the reasons for imposing the condition on occupancy were considered to be required to safeguard neighbours' privacy and to ensure that the property had sufficient private outdoor space. The current application does not appear to offer any changes to the previous applications which would address this point. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I'll open up to questions. Bailey Williamson, any questions? And Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, I'm slightly confused by this one. I wasn't aware that someone overlooking a garden preventing a house being a house, if you like. Modern estates seem to be built with all the houses in rows and looking straight down on each other's gardens. So I can't quite understand why that would be an issue. I can understand that overlooking where the window of one house looks into the window of another. Do we know if the 25, is it 25-degree test? The test, so are we had a test done to see if you can actually see into the property from the adjacent property?
There's no evidence of that, Councillor. I think what the handling report refers to is the view from the property and from the decking attached to the property of a private garden to the rear, rather than views into the property from the garden, although I agree that could be an issue.
I'm just wondering if we need to do a site visit here. I'm relaxed about whether we do or not. It's just, I can't visualize how the back garden and how the overlooking aspect works from the two adjacent properties. It's fine when it's an ancillary property because if you're overlooking into the window of the next door neighbour, but I can't tell from the photographs and I've not seen it, so.
I've not seen the back myself. I know the frontage of it, I must admit, but it's entirely your decision. If I could just ask Mr. Burton just one question though before we go to that. The picture we're looking at now, the actual garden we're talking about, is that all the way across to the right of the picture, or is there a boundary which is not quite clearly shown on there?
As I understand it, Councillor, that's the entire width of the garden. It covers, it stretches from behind the application property to the neighbouring house, to behind the neighbouring house. It would have originally been, I think, the garden of the application house, if you like, the house, the two-storey building. And that is the issue. As I understand it, the issue is that people living in the what is now ancillary accommodation, but which, if this application were granted, would be a separate dwelling, would have a clear view into what is normally considered to be private garden space.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Cuthbert, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm relaxed about a site visit. I think the garden may be sufficient issue for me to come to a conclusion anyway.
Let me then, I have no more questions, and therefore let me ask then, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? So, Bailey Williamson.
We have sufficient information, Convener.
And I think we have as well, so I'll ask Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you very much. So, we'll move now to debate. So, Bailey Williamson, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material, may I ask you to start, please?
Thank you, Convener. Reading back on some of the background of the applications of this property, I genuinely believe that I would agree with officers and refuse this application.
Thank you. This is I'll come in there if I may as well. This is an unusual one, to be honest. As I say, I've seen the frontage of it. It is a house, it's there, it's in position, so it's been built and it was built some years ago. The question, of course, comes down to the position of the garden. And my thoughts would be that this is a question for market forces to determine. Somebody buying this house will know what they're getting. They know they're going to have no garden, just I think a terrace at the back. Likewise, the people selling it at the moment who wish to sell it must be aware that by selling this property, they are going to be overlooked. So I would think it's a question in my mind for a market decision. Do the sellers really want to go ahead and sell it? And if somebody buys it, will they buy it without a garden? And knowing that when the time comes for them to sell, they too may have problems selling the property to somebody who doesn't want a garden. So my thoughts on this occasion would be to grant the appeal and leave it purely to market forces to determine what happens next. Councillor Cuthbert, are you happy now to deal with the situation?
Thank you, Convener. So I get to make the choice. I find this one quite difficult. There is this question of overlooking. I'm not altogether convinced that there isn't overlooking from the main house into the small house and vice versa, which should, I would have thought, been done and checked in the report of handling. The garden is very small. There are properties in Kinross with no garden similar to this, but I do have an issue with a private garden immediately overlooking another private garden from an elevated position, because I believe the terrace at the back is elevated. So I'm minded to refuse it on this occasion. I would, if the garden was bigger and the site from the larger house to the smaller one wasn't overlooking, I think it could be then considered at that point. So I'm minded to refuse, basically on the conditions and the reasoning given by the planner.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. So we assume it appears again another 2-1 decision. Mr. Fogg, is there anything you wanted to come out and know?
No, I think the reasons are clearly stated by the majority decision makers. Convener, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fogg. Councillor Cuthbert, yes.
Just on the conditions in paragraph 2, there seems to be a typo in the penultimate line. It may be worth just correcting that. It's nothing significant. It says on the site while respecting its environs or improve the character and environment of the due to the lac. So it's off the due doesn't make sense. So the off the should be removed. If that makes sense. I'm dyslexic, so maybe it does make sense.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. It seems to be not my day today. I seem to be the odd one out there so far. Thank you very much, members. We'll now move on to number 4.4, which is the erection of a fence at 1 Commanders Grove, Braco, Dunblane. Again, Mr. Burton, if you'd introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. Starting with some slides of the site. Again, not too many this time, you'll be glad to know. The application site, you can see bounded in red towards the bottom of the picture there. The area of ground in question is the area between the fence that you can see on the right-hand side of the rear garden, between the area between that and the road, the A822. The proposal is to extend the side fence up to the road and to move the brick and stone entrance feature accordingly. You can see that the area in question is grey in colour. That's because it is gravel. On the other side of the road of Commander's Grove, the same area is grassed. Could you go to the next slide, please? The application site is at the very start of the village. As you can see, the pavement stops at the side of the applicant's house, and you can see the area in question is an area of gravel with some weeds growing in it. Next slide, please. That's a close-up. You can see there used to be a tree at that end of the application of the area, which has been removed, and you can see that there's a fence on the left-hand side there, which is the same fence, the same design of fence, which would be extended to the heel of the curb if the application were to be granted. And you can see that on the other side of Commander's Grove, the fence and entrance feature are the same distance back from the main road. Next slide, please. That's taken from on the other side of the road, and you can see that the similar area is grassed. There's a tree there, and you can see how close the edge of the village is to the application site. The trees which form the boundary, which show the boundary of the village, starts just beyond the application site. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. So, essentially quite a simple proposal. It's proposed to extend the rear garden of the application property into the area between the rear garden and the road. The ground is in the ownership of the applicant, as is the case on the other side of the road, where the owner of the house there owns the land on the outside, if you like, of the entrance feature and fence. So the proposal is to erect a 1.8 metre high fence along the heel of the footpath, enclosing an area of land which currently lies between the footpath and the existing fence. The applicant's case is that the area between the existing fence and the road is the property of the applicant. At the moment, there's nothing to stop people and their dogs walking through it. The proposal would allow the owner, a keen gardener, to improve the area for the benefit of the community. The report of handling states that the application site was originally the same as that across the road, grassed with trees and shrubs, forming an entrance feature into the housing estate and a green buffer between the road and the houses of the estate. While the grass and shrubs and trees have been removed and replaced with gravel, that is not irreversible, and the space remains a resource which has amenity value by forming part of the wider housing development and acting as a landscaped entrance feature and a buffer to the A822. The proposed new fence, which would screen the stone wall feature detail, would have a negative impact on the visual amenity of the area and would unbalance the symmetry that currently exists at the estate entrance. It would also erode the local distinctiveness, visual and landscape qualities that presently form the entrance to the village. As such, the proposal is contrary to Policy 1B, placemaking of the local development plan. No public representations were received. Material considerations. Policy 1B, parts A, B, C and D of the local development plan are correctly identified as material considerations, as the proposal would have an impact on the wider visual amenity. The only observation I would make is that the current condition and appearance of the area, which would be enclosed by the proposed fence, is not material. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
Not on this occasion. No, thank you.
I have none either. So, Bailey Williamson.
No questions from me, Convener.
Thank you, members. So can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? I'm certainly happy to proceed. Councillor Cuthbert?
Happy to proceed.
And Bailey Williamson?
Happy to proceed, Convener.
Thank you very much. So on this occasion, I'll start. We've had a similar situation like this on several local review bodies in the past, where people want to extend onto amenity ground of sorts and erect a fence around them. And the situation has always been the same, that it does deter from the original concept of what was there. But the solution offered on those occasions was perhaps that, as in this case, the applicant and the owner of the property on the other side of the Commander's Grove could perhaps come together and decide on a similar fence to be put in place, and then approach planners from there. That may not be possible, of course, as the circumstances are. But in this instance, the fence proposed, I think, would take away the concept of what was originally planned, the spirit of the plan for the entrance to the properties. Whilst I appreciate it would ensure that the ground is not invaded by other people and dogs, it would take away the spirit of what this entrance was supposed to look like, and would not balance the entrance with the property opposite. A fence possibly, maybe some sort of ranch style fencing, a lower level may be possible. And I say that might be something that the applicant could speak with the owner of number 2 across the way. But as this application stands, as it's been designed, I would have to refuse the appeal on the basis of the officer's explanation. Councillor Cuthbert.
I completely agree with that, Convener, which is unusual. In principle, it would. I've looked at the site from the road, and I've pulled up and had a look, and it just would ruin the symmetry of the area if the person proposing this can talk to their neighbour, see if they can come to an agreement so it matches roughly. I'd agree with that. Maybe a lower fence around the outside rather than a tall fence. But as the application stands, I can't support it. So I would also refuse the application.
And Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. I also agree with your sentiments. I believe that the original design would be lost at the entrance to the buildings. There would be no symmetry. Indeed, the tree that was previous property there has already been cut down, but I can't support this application.
Thank you very much. So we have a unanimous decision again. Mr. Fogg, any comments from there? No? So we're happy that on this occasion we have rejected the appeal. Thank you. So we'll now move on, if we may, to item 4.5. This is the erection of 7 dwelling houses and the garage and formation landscape and associated works land 480 metres southeast of 4 Pitfer Homesteadings in Pelmill. I hope I've pronounced all that right. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. Because it's quite a remote site, starting off with just a settings picture. You can see the site bounded in red towards the right hand side there, and you can see it's in what appears to be open countryside. If you follow the road to the north, you'll see there's a slight kink in the road about halfway between the application site and the main road. That's where there is a small steading development currently under construction, which I think is a few number of houses in this, but was granted some time ago under the old local plan. Next slide, please. So closer in, you can see that the red line excludes a building on the right hand side there. That's 2 semi-detached cottages which are existing and which don't form part of the application site. Just to the north of these 2 buildings of that is a stable building, and to the west is a large shed. As you can see, there's also a significant amount of hard standing within the application site. Next slide, please. So this is the road leading down towards the site. You can see it's a single track road with some, but not many, passing places. Next slide, please. And this is looking towards the large structure you can see there is the large shed. The yellow structure that you can see to the left of that are the stables, which are proposed to be removed, and the houses that are proposed to be retained are just beyond the stables. As you can see there, the site is slightly elevated, and the countryside is very open round about it. Next slide, please. From closer up, you can have a better view of the dwellings there. You can see the 2-story building behind on the left-hand side behind the stable block, and that's the building that's proposed to be retained. Next slide, please. Towards the entrance to the site, you can see the stable block and the 2-story semi-detached buildings to be retained. On the right-hand side is the edge of the large barn. Next slide, please. And that's the barn. As you can see, it's a significant size, and there's also land alongside it which has previously been used as I would guess a yard area. Next slide, please. And that's looking at that part of the site to the north of the barn, which I think would have 2 houses on it. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the stables, which would be partly converted and partly added to form a dwelling. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the houses which are to remain. Next slide, please. And then looking beyond that to the site of a single house just beyond the tree there. Next slide, please. And you can see the edge of the large barn area and the large area of hard standing. I think there were 2 houses proposed for that area. Next slide, please. And looking at the barn, where it's proposed to be removed, and there will be another house developed pretty much in the centre of where the barn stands. Next slide, please. And that's looking towards the access to the site and towards the countryside beyond. Next slide, please. And this is the other standing development that I mentioned, which is about halfway between the main road and the application site. This was granted under the former local development plan, not under the current local development plan. And I think it's for, I understand it's for either 4 or 5 houses. So it's a smaller development than the application that's proposed here. I think that's it. So we can go back to the main slide. Thank you. So the proposal is for the erection of 7 houses, a garage, landscaping and associated works. The proposal is to demolish the large shed that you can see, convert a former stable to a house and erect 6 more detached houses grouped around a central courtyard. 2 of the houses would have 5 bedrooms and 5 of the houses would have 4 bedrooms. All would be 2 stories in height. 2 existing 2-storey semi-detached houses would remain, making 9 houses in total. The farm setting is reached by a single track and metalled road. Planning permission was granted in 2015 for 6 dwelling houses. That also, I understand, included removing the 2 existing houses, so 6 dwelling houses in total that were proposed, that were granted. But that permission, granted, which was granted under the Kinross area local plan, has now lapsed. To summarise the applicant's case, the farm is unused and has been marketed for over a year. The proposal meets the spirit of Policy 19, housing in the countryside. The 2 semi-detached houses, the stable and the silage pit, should be considered to be a building group. The stable block's conversion to a dwelling is supported by the policy and in the report of handling. The proposal is supported by policy in terms of the redevelopment of Brenfield land. No ecological information was requested by the case officer, so that element of the proposal was not assessed. The case officer did not request a detailed landscaping plan, although it should be noted that there was a plan submitted as part of the application, so that element of the proposal cannot be properly assessed. The farm buildings will continue to deteriorate if a new use cannot be found. To summarise the report of handling, Policy 19, housing in the countryside, is the relevant policy which should be used to assess the proposal. The applicant suggests that the proposal is supported by the policy under Category 1, building groups. Only the stable block, which could be converted to residential use, and the existing semi-detached houses can be included under this assessment, so the proposal fails to comply with this part of the policy. Category 5 of the policy, conversion or replacement of redundant traditional buildings, could meet this description if it's considered traditional, but the agricultural shed could not be considered to be traditional. Category 6, brownfield land. This allows for small-scale housing proposals on cleared sites which have been significantly degraded by former use or activity. The site is not cleared, the large shed remains, and while the applicant has stated that it is likely there's some contamination, no evidence has been provided as to the presence or amount of contamination. The supplementary guidance which this application falls to be assessed under makes it clear that the scale of development must be commensurate with the scale of remedial works required. Without such supporting information, the application is not supported. The site is open and elevated. The landscaping required to mitigate the proposed development is more than that proposed by the applicant. The visual impact of the proposed development is not therefore acceptable. The access to the application site is not adopted. Road services take the view that the access would need to be upgraded with passing places. The Council's affordable housing policy would mean that a contribution of £33,250 would be required if planning permission were to be granted. There have been 9 letters of objection received from members of the public on the grounds that the proposal is contrary to the local development plan, is unsustainable, there are a lack of services, including transport, the development would be over-intensive, there will be road safety and traffic congestion caused by the proposal. The proposal will be out of character and there will be no affordable housing provided. Material considerations. The relevant local development plan policies have been correctly identified as Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, Policy 41, Biodiversity, and Policy 1A, Placemaking. Of the matters raised by the objectors, the lack of affordable housing and the unsustainable nature of the development are also material. Some observations. The previous consent, which lapsed in 2018, was granted under the Kinross Area Local Plan, which has been replaced by the current Local Development Plan and is therefore not a material consideration. The extent of the hard standing and level of contamination are matters which could potentially support some development on the site, given full information. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I have a couple of questions, if I may. From a just general information, a planning situation, is there any reason why the building would be the two semi-detached houses which exist now, the fact it's been counted as just one? Is it purely because it is just one structure? Not, you know, there are two homes there, two habitable properties, but is it because it's just one building effectively that it counts as one?
I'm not sure, Councillor, but I think that must be the case. Whether it's counted as one or two dwellings or a single building, I don't think really changes things materially.
And the only other point I was going to ask you was to do with the access. We talk about passing places. I would assume that the applicant would have access to land to widen the road. Presumably the road isn't wide enough as it is, and I noticed in some of the objections he doesn't have access to land to create passing places. It's not mentioned in the refusal about access, but I'm assuming that is a problem he would face.
I would agree. It's a narrow road, and there were the only passing places were those that were used as field entrances. So there was no passing places constructed as such that I could see, and it's a long road as well. So you're correct that the applicant wouldn't have control over the land either side of that road.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson, any questions?
No questions from me, convener.
And Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
No questions, no, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? So Bailey Williamson. I'm
satisfied to continue, convener.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
Fine, then we'll now move to debate. So can I ask Bailey Williamson, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan and all other relevant material, could I ask you please to start?
Thank you, convener. I'm not satisfied that this application is contrary to the development. I think it supports the officer's recommendation around about policy 19. Neither am I satisfied around the silage pit being contaminated. There's not sufficient evidence provided that there is contamination on the site. So for that, I would be inclined to refuse.
Thank you. So I'll come in there if I may. I too feel that we have to refuse the application, the appeal on this application. It doesn't, I feel, fit with any of the supplementary guidance, the current supplementary guidance. The argument that a silage pit is a building, I think, is not the spirit of what the supplementary guidance was. It's not a building. It is a construction, but it's not a building in that sense. So I think that argument falls there. So given that situation and the number of properties that are intended in the plan, we'd end up with 9 properties up in a prominent site. I think it's too high. So overall, and considering access as well, I'm inclined to refuse the appeal. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, similarly, I'm minded to refuse the appeal. My main concern is the scale of what's being proposed. My view is the additional 7 units on top of the 2 that are pre-existing is excessive for the site. I would say that it's probably in breach of policy 1B on the basis of size and scale, and probably breaches category 6 of supplementary guidance, which says a maximum of 5 units, and this is a proposal for 7 new units. I'm not sure about the development on a rural brownfield site. This might fit that category were it to be a smaller development, but as it stands, I think it does breach this particular part of policy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fogg, over to you if there's anything you wish to clarify. Okay.
No, I'm content with what's been stated by all three of you, that that's sufficient for the purpose of the minute, convener.
Right, thank you very much. So another unanimous decision for us today. We'll now move on to item 4.6. If I find my place. There we go. This is the erection of a garage on land 15 metres north of 20 Greystone Terrace in Invergowrie. So Mr. Burton, if you could introduce the paper again.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start as ever with some photographs. If you could go to the first slide, please. Oh, sorry, back to the, yeah. Now you can, oh. Right, thank you. You can see the application site bounded in red there. It's at the end of an area currently used for parking. You can see some existing garages on the right-hand side of the entrance to the hard surface area, and there's a garage adjacent to the application site, which is associated with the house, which is just to the north of it. You can, I think, just make out in the aerial picture there that the ground slopes away downwards to the Invergowrie burn from the rear of the site, and as you can see, it forms part of a larger area of woodland. Next slide, please. Looking towards the application site, you can see the garages on the right-hand side, which are not directly associated with houses. You can see as well the area, the dark shape to the right of the application site, which is the garage of the house to the right of that structure. Next slide, please. So a closer up view of it. You can see that there's a round style fence in front of the site. There's no drop curb at the moment, and the garden of the adjacent house extends beyond the frontage to the application site. You can see it's roughly cleared ground, but it's also grassed with some shrubs and trees at the edge of it. You can also see that the pavement basically ends in a hedge just to the right of the application site boundary. I think that's probably the best slide to leave up. If we can go back to, I'll take you back to that slide if we need to. So the proposal is for the erection of a garage in part of a wider woodland area at the end of Greystone Terrace, a cul-de-sac comprising 2-storey housing and garages. The applicant's case is the garage would be located on an existing concrete platform and would have a finish and design which would tie in with adjacent properties, a house to the south and a freestanding garage to the north. The rear of the garage would be screened by mature trees. To summarise the report of handling, policies 1A and B, placemaking, and policy 17, residential areas, are relevant. Policies 1A and B require proposals to contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment and to respect existing character and amenity. The proposed garage is of a scale which would be overly dominant and oppressive. It fails to respect the character and visual amenity of the area. Criteria E of policy 1B seeks to ensure that all buildings should create safe, accessible, inclusive places which are easily navigable, particularly on foot. The garage's proposed design would lead to cars attempting to gain access to the single garage would have to cross the footway, which is not acceptable in terms of road safety. Policy 17 notes that small areas of public open space will be retained where they are of recreational or amenity value. The woodland at the application site is considered to have value in terms of visual amenity. 6 letters of objection were received from members of the public, giving reasons of pedestrian safety, blocking of light, the potential for the garage to be used for commercial purposes, traffic implications, access to the garage would restrict existing parking, stability to the sloping bank to the rear of the garage, and water runoff. Material considerations. The handling report correctly identifies policies 1A and B as material. Policy 17 is also material, as are policies 53C, surface water drainage, and policy 14A, open space retention and provision. Of the matters raised by objectors, pedestrian safety, access issues, potential traffic problems, and the potential stability of the bank to the rear of the proposed garage are all material. Some observations. No information was provided by the applicant regarding the stability of the bank to the rear of the site. As this matter has been raised by local residents as well as the case officer in terms of surface water runoff, it must be considered. The fact that the applicant lives some distance from the garage on Greystone Road, approximately 160 metres away, suggests that it might possibly be used for long-term storage rather than as a normal domestic garage. Thank you, Chair. I'll happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. We'll open up for questions then. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
No, Convener, I don't.
And Bailey Williamson, any questions?
Thank you. Could I go back? I think it was 1 or 2 pictures where the view looks straight down Greystone Terrace, please. That's the one. Am I right in saying that that's a garage just to the right of the proposed application? Yes.
That's correct, Councillor. It's one of, from memory, three garages that are there, which are associated with houses which use the that area for parking.
Secondly, there's a hedge there that I'm assuming goes all the way back past the garage, and it actually straddles the footpath. So I take it the footpath's actually got no ending on that. It just ends at the hedge.
It does, Councillor. That's correct.
And finally, at number 20, how did they get access to the property around the side, or is it just a gate they have? They have no car access.
If we could go on to the next picture, I think that shows. Do you mean the property to that property there? Yeah, it's got the access you can see there, so it doesn't have a vehicular access. Although I guess it could form one if it really wanted to. But yeah, it doesn't have vehicular access, just that pedestrian access.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question myself, Mr. Burton. The land itself, is it classed as open space? I mean, it was presumably left like that for a reason to let people into the back, but you say it drops down steeply at the back anyway, so it's not a place you can walk your dogs or anything like that.
Yes, it is. It's classed as part of the woodland that you can see stretching behind the site, the trees there. You're quite correct. You wouldn't really want to walk across it. There's nowhere to go. I don't think it would be a place for dog walkers.
But is it actually classed as open space, or is it? Was it white space?
Yeah, I think it might. To be honest, I'm not quite sure. I think it might be open space in terms of amenity as opposed to recreational open space.
Okay, members. You may have a yes, sir.
Thank you, Convener. It's just going back to your picture about Greystone Terrace. There was parking, or I take it there's available parking on the right-hand side. Is that correct?
If we could go back to the last picture, please. There is land available for parking. Yes. If you go to the aerial shot, I think that shows it quite well. Yeah. You can see what looks like 3 garages to the right-hand side of the entrance there, and the parking area, the tarmac area widens out beyond them. So yes, there's area for off-street, well, for on-street parking, I suppose, but there's area for parking all the way along there. You can see in the next slide, you'll see there's a van. There's a van that's parked there, which I presume is owned by one of the associated one of the houses to the north there.
So it would be safe to assume there is sufficient parking there on that street.
I would say so, Councillor. Yes.
Members, can we proceed to determine the application on review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And Bailey Williamson.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So we'll move to debate. Can I ask Councillor Cuthbert, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, could I ask you to start, please?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm afraid that my position is to refuse the appeal. I think the scale and the massing of the proposed garage is excessive for the size of the plot. I think were it to be a smaller garage, I might consider it differently. So I think it does contravene policy 1A of the local development plan. I didn't agree with the other criterion that was put in by the planner in this case, which is that it was removing footpath access and the fact that you'd have to cross the adjacent footpath to get into the garage. I don't agree with that. I think that's quite normal. So I would refuse the appeal on the basis of breach of policy 1A, possibly 1B section C as well, but not the section about the footpath and the parking.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I ask for your comment.
I'll return the favor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener. I agree essentially with what Councillor Cuthbert has mentioned about the footpath. I am inclined to disagree with Officer's recommendation about the footpath that doesn't seem to lead anywhere. Although I am concerned about the drop-off at the back of the site and where it has been provided to reassure us on the stability of that ground, particularly in high surface water incidents. So I'm like Councillor Cuthbert, I agree we should be looking at policy 1A and refusing this application.
Thank you, Bailey Williamson. And I too will concur with both of you to refuse the application, refuse the appeal for this application. It's the sizing of the proposed property that I think is the worst part of it. It's far too large for that particular part of the area, and I too I think what we're looking at is reason for refusal number 3 is the one which we seem to think is not the one that should be there, and perhaps we ask that one to be deleted. But I'll ask Mr. Fogg to comment on that. But I agree with both of you that we refuse the appeal. Thank you.
Convener, it's entirely within the gift of the LRB this morning to depart from the third reason for refusal founded on by the appointed officer, which seems to be the consensus of all 3 of you, but that you would support the first and second reasons for refusal.
Yes, let me just clarify. Members, are we happy to delete reason 3 for the refusal, which is the one which seemed to be... Yes. I'll let you both have a look. Hang on. It's to do with the parking and the access on the footpath. Yeah, let me just let you read. That's item 3. And Bailey Williamson, number 3, we're talking about deleting that one off.
I agree, convener.
Okay, fine. Then Mr. Fogg gets just reasons for refusal 1 and 2, and we've both asked for number 3 to be deleted. Thank you, members. So a unanimous decision again on that one. So we now move on to item 4.7, which is the last one on our list today. I'll ask Mr. Burton to introduce this. This is the erection of a dwelling house on land 25 metres northeast of number 2 Lagan Road, Crieff.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs first. If we could move to the first slide, please. You can see the application site in red towards the top of the photograph there. The applicant's house is immediately south of it. There are 2 houses currently under construction in what was an extensive front garden area between the applicant's house and Horseshoe Drive. The application site would not access Horseshoe Drive, but would have an access onto Turret Bank Road. First slide, please. That's showing where the access would be on Turret Bank Road. Where the wooden fence ends in a brick pier is the edge of the application site, and it extends about a third of the way along that photograph towards the camera. Next slide, please. So within the site, looking at that fence that bounds onto Turret Bank Road, you can see that part of the application site is fairly rough, unkempt ground, not currently in active use as part of the garden of the main house. Next slide, please. That's looking along the boundary fence to the adjacent house, not the applicant's house, but the adjacent house to the north. And you can see that there are some established shrubs in part of the application site. Next slide, please. And looking down this is looking from the edge of the application site, the western edge of the application site. So you can see part of it contains well-established shrubs which have been maintained over the years. The applicant's intention would be to move these shrubs to their existing garden if this application were to be removed. Next slide, please. And part of the site is used as garden space. So the application site ends round about the tree that you see, or I think it's a rhododendron on the right-hand side of the picture, and beyond the shrubbery that you're looking at, beyond that is Turret Bank Road. Next slide, please. And that's looking back at the western point of the site across the applicant's existing garden area. So you can see the proximity of the house, of the main house, to the proposal. Next slide, please. And that's looking. You can see the applicant's main house there is the one at the rear with the dark cladding on the upper floor, and that's one of the 2 houses that have been granted consent recently and under construction in front of the house. Next slide, please. And that's the other house. You can see that's the one that's closer to Lagan Road, and you can see that's a less advanced stage of construction than the other side, than the other house rather. I think that's all the slides now. So if we could go back to the original one, thank you. Just for clarification, the most recent picture of the structure of the house showing which wasn't well as advanced stage of construction as the other one is the one that's closest to the corner of Horseshoe Drive and Lagan Drive, near where it says Epicallum Oak there, and the other house, which is more advanced state of construction, was further along Horseshoe Drive to the north of the access path, or the access driveway rather, to the main house. So the proposal is for the erection of a single house, a detached house on the garden ground to the rear of number 2 Lagan Road. 2 other detached houses currently under construction within the plot were granted permission in 2021. The proposed house would be located to the northeast of the original house and would be accessed directly off Turret Bank Road. A single-storey house with 2 bedrooms, study and kitchen, 2 bedrooms, study, kitchen, dining, living room is proposed. To summarise the applicant's case, an application for 4 new houses on the plot submitted in 2020 was withdrawn because of concerns over the scale of development proposed. Following a successful application for 2 houses, which are under construction, discussions were undertaken with the planning officer about a potential 3rd house. Concerns were raised then about the plot becoming cramped. The house has been designed and situated within the plot to avoid overlooking and to minimise its impact on the original house, and the garden planting proposals have been planned to give privacy and to frame the new house within its garden. Drainage proposals have been developed to fit in with the development of the 2 new houses under construction. The plot density is 22%, in keeping with typical plot densities in the immediate area, where densities vary from 16% to 24%, and the existing building line to Turret Bank Road has been respected. To summarise the report of handling, policies 17, residential areas, and policies 1A and 1B, placemaking, are relevant, as are policies 53B and 53C, drainage, and policies 60B, access and car parking. While the plot size is comparable with others in the area, in terms of the context of the original Oak Bank house, the proposal gives the impression of being squeezed into a side garden. This means, from a placemaking perspective, that the proposal would not contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding environment, would fail to respect the character and amenity of the area, and so would fail to comply with policies 1A, 1B and 17. These form reasons 1 and 2 of the refusal notice. There will be no overlooking or overshadowing issues, and there will be an adequate amount of garden ground for the dwelling. While the Council's road services do not object, there is a requirement for 2 off-street parking spaces, and the parking area appears tight, given that both cars will need to be able to enter and leave the parking area in forward gear, and that forms reason 3 of the refusal. 2 public representations were received, objecting on the grounds of adverse effect on visual amenity, loss of open space, over-intensive development, road safety, loss of amenity and privacy, and impact on water and waste capacity. Material considerations. The policies are identified by the case officers, policies 1A and 1B, policies 17 and 60B, transport, are all material considerations. Of the issues raised by public objections, visual amenity and residential amenity and road safety are all material. Some observations. The plot of the proposed house is sufficient to give an adequate amount of garden ground, but is smaller than the other 2 plots formed in the curtilage of the main house. The vehicular access would be to Turret Bank Road rather than Horseshoe Drive, which the existing house and the 2 houses under construction use. The Council's road service has no objection, but the case officer has raised a concern over the practicality of the access onto Turret Bank Road. The committee will need to take a view after considering the road services response and the proposed site plan, whether this should stand as a reason for refusal. It should be noted that if the application is granted, a financial contribution for education would be required. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Bailey Williamson, any questions from you?
No questions from me, convener.
Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
Just one, really. The house to the north of the site, do you know if that's single story, 2-story, 1.5 or?
I can't recall, Councillor, I'm afraid. I would say it's likely to be 2-story because a lot of them were in that area, but I would not like to speculate beyond that.
Thank you for that. I have visited the site. I seem to recall it was a 2-story. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's on page 706. There is a picture of it there, just if you wanted to see it. There. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just had one question, Mr. Burton. It's to do with the turning the 2 parking spaces and the ability to come out in forward gear. When you see these sites, of course, it's very difficult to imagine it, but I mean, your thoughts would be that it could be incorporated. I mean, it's a difficult one to answer, I know, with these things, but do you feel there was sufficient space to be able to have 2 car parking spaces and turn cars around and come back out on a forward gear?
There is a site, the proposed site plan shows a turning circle off Turret Bank Road, which has a radius of 18.65 metres. I am far from being an expert on roads engineering matters. It would seem to me that it seems likely that it would be possible for 2 vehicles to be parked off road there and to allow space for turning. I would say so, but as I say, I caveat that by saying I'm far from being an expert, but it would have been helpful if the roads response had come to a conclusion on that.
Thank you very much. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but thank you for your input. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Bailey Williamson.
I'm content to proceed, Convener.
Thank you. And Councillor Cuthbert?
Happy to proceed.
And I too am as well. So we'll now move to debate. And Bailey Williamson, having considered the applicant's papers, report of handling, Perth and Kinross local development plan and all other relevant material planning considerations, could I ask you please to start?
Thank you, Convener. I am concerned that this application is contrary to place spacing policy 1A and 1B, so I agree with the first reason for refusal. As officers have pointed out, there is an appearance of the dwelling being squeezed into the garden. I also believe that it's contrary to policy 17 as well, so another reason for refusal. And finally, 60B as well, transport standards. So given that information, I'm content to refuse.
Thank you, Bailey Williamson. I'll have a comment here myself. I too feel that this is a situation of a house being squeezed into a smaller plot. I think one of the comments made in the appeal papers was that if you saw the plot, you'd change your mind, haven't seen the plans, but the plans to me seem to be okay, but when you actually see it, it does seem to be a very small area. So I'm of a mind to agree with planning officers on this. I'm not sure that I would agree with reason for refusal 3, but I would concur with my other colleagues if they wish to keep that in. But as it stands at the moment, I'm prepared to refuse the appeal. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yep, I think it's going to be unanimous. I would also say it's too small a plot, appears to be squeezed into the garden grounds. I do have concerns about the overlooking both from this proposed house and the house to the north. They're very close. There's virtually, I mean, I think the house to the north is slightly higher, but I think it's just too big a house in it's too small a site. So I'd agree with 1 and 2. In terms of policy 3, I guess it depends how good a driver you are. I'm relaxed about whether it's included or not.
So, Mr. Fogg, it's a unanimous decision to refuse. On a minor point, on the reason for refusal 1, it talks of policy 1B. I think it might be better to actually put 1BC, which I think is the policy that actually applies to it, just so it specifies precisely what we're talking about in 1B. And then it's a question of whether we include item 3. I'm happy for it to stay in. I think it perhaps is not necessary, but if my 2 colleagues are happy to keep it, I am as well.
Sorry, I'm taking it that it's unanimously refused and for the 3 reasons stated by the appointed officer.
If everybody's happy, I think number 3 is probably superfluous, but if my 2 colleagues wish to keep it in, and they're happy to keep it, I am. I'll let Councillor Cuthbert arbitrate on this one.
I suggest we take it out in that case.
I'm ambiguous to it, but I would have been happy to just keep it in.
Well, then I think that the majority decision is to remove refuse reason number 3, and if we can just put in 1BC in number 1, and we're there. Okay, well, everybody, that completes today's local review body. Only leaves me to thank my 2 colleagues for being with me today. Thank Mr. Burton, Mr. Fogg, and Jessica at the end for all the work they've put in. Thank you very much, and we may see you on the next one at some stage. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Bye-bye.